That's the final word, okay? I will brook no disagreement on this matter.
Your racist loves, Connor. One day they're going to go too far.
Every hero has a fatal flaw, and it just turns out that all of my heroes' fatal flaw is racism.
It's being racist towards Chinese people, yes.
Specifically Asian racism. Mm-hmm. Well, what can I say? I have a type. That's why I love Alex Nicholson so much.
No, he's black racism.
No, don't you remember? He was the one who said, this motherfucker can't even open his eyes.
I think he's broad brush, though, so you don't like him that much.
Not specific enough, exactly. Yeah, it's the fighters who really, really just don't like Chinese people that I really rock with.
I'm surprised there aren't more, to be honest.
Hello. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie. And, we've made it through week one of the return of the UFC. What was promised to be a spate of just endlessly entertaining cards after our sort of long hiatus from the sport and the promotion in particular, more or less delivered. I mean, I gotta be honest. We may have a chance at some point down the road, or I don't know, on a bonus episode or something, to give our feelings on, our very mixed feelings on this whole time. But in terms of the quality of fights that we got, I think we have seen some banger undercards, for real. And Wednesdays, the midweek card with Smith versus Teixeira, absolutely lived up to that. And so did last weekend's card. I thought, once again, we had a big dumb main event that ended up being like weirdly tragic. And not just because the fighters were heavyweights. It ended up just being like a painful ordeal to watch by the end. And yet everything leading up to that was pretty awesome. So awesome, in fact, that the judges had no idea how to score any of it. Phil, your thoughts? That tends to happen, right? When you have really well-matched fights. The judges have no fucking clue what they're seeing. Your thoughts on what we'll mainly be covering on today's episode, that being UFC on ESPN 8, Overeem versus Harris?
I mean, yeah, just to go back to one of your earlier points, I think there was a lot of reason to be worried going into these events that we were going to see greatly diminished UFC fighters.
Yeah.
We were going to see guys who hadn't had access to the training methods, to their training camps, that hadn't had access to their gyms. We were going to see a selection of like dad bod fighters who just looked rusty and out of sorts. And remarkably, it really doesn't seem to have turned out like that. I mean, one of the things which has sort of characterized these three cards as a whole has been technical growth from top to bottom,
right?
Pretty much,
right.
We've seen more people being diverse in how they strike. We talked about this with Danny Martin on the bonus episode. And, in terms of setting up body shots or like throwing combinations,
I feel like we've seen some surprising defensive improvements from certain fighters, which is something I always like to see.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of checked kicks this last week.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, it's been a palpable technical shift, which I think possibly speaks to the something that we've also discussed at times with regards to training, which is that perhaps one of the most important things to do is just to switch it up every now and again. And
right.
It seems like everyone being punted sideways a bit in terms of their training situation, it sort of shook everyone up a bit, and they've all, broadly, not everyone obviously, have come out looking kind of refreshed.
Yeah, I actually didn't even really think of that as a factor, but I think you might be right. Like, it's sort of like tilling the garden, like if everything's just been so mixed up that suddenly there's like a loose room for these fighters to grow. Yeah, I don't know. Also, we've seen several people come in at higher weight classes.
Yeah,
I have also. Yeah, I have long pointed out that if fighters spent less time worrying about their weight cut and less time affected by their weight cut, they'd probably get to enjoy more of their camp training time actually getting better at fighting. And yeah, I agree. I think it wasn't just that everyone was like similarly brought down, by the same degree. I think it was quite the opposite. I think a lot of fighters have shown up this week looking better, looking sharper, looking more enthusiastic, more creative, less like, I don't know. Yeah, it's... I wish I had one nice clean takeaway so I could start like banging some drum. Like I could say, oh, it's just because of the weight cutting or whatever. But I think you're probably right that it's like, it's just sort of interesting,
Yeah.
like
I think it's just, I think that's just the main thing, is that there is no one element which has happened. It's just been a shakeup. And
interesting
in
times.
a shakeup, people are forced to sort of look at themselves and new and exciting, and yeah, it genuinely does seem to have borne fruit. And this was another surprisingly great card. I mean, the real test is going to be the upcoming cards that we've got.
Well, right.
Which of which there are a couple, because so far, and specifically with UFC 250, they look like trash.
Well, they don't look like much at all, if we're being really honest.
Yeah.
Because for all that Dana White has talked about fighters, the entire roster clamoring for fight appointments, this next event is coming up on May 30th, which, as we speak, is 11 days from now. Not even 2 weeks. It has a 4-fight card, none of which is really a fantastic main event. And then, 250 is supposed to happen 1 week after that. So that would be in 18 days. And it has a title fight, but not one of the ones that everyone really wants to see. And then 4 other fights. And that's a pay-per-view.
Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to how exciting I could be for the potential technical improvements of a new and reinvigorated Charles Bird and Maki Patola. But...
yeah.
At the moment, it's been surprisingly great.
For what we've gotten, it has been really, really fascinating. Shockingly, shocking the degree to which fighters do seem to have grown in these circumstances. I'm not sure if any of that really applies to the main event, which is what we're going to start out talking about. By the way, if you want to hear our thoughts on that midweek card, Phil mentioned it just before, but we had Danny Martin from the Fight Site join us for what was basically a whole nother full main episode. It was like an hour and a half of discussion. I think I cut it down to an hour and 15, and we broke down many aspects of that card, and also did a sort of a follow-up segment at the top about Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje as well. So make sure you check that out on the Patreon. It's just $3 a month to listen to stuff like that. But today, Overeem, Harris, as I was very clear to say, the undercard was where we saw all this like tremendous growth and these excitingly close matchups. This one could have gone 2 ways, and it did indeed go both of those ways. And the last way it went was the sad one. That's about it. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any nuanced thoughts? Overeem's chin got checked, and then Walt Harris is even for a heavyweight grappler, not very good. Slipped on one of the silliest front kick attempts I've ever seen, and it was over. The moment that he was no longer thrashing Overeem, he was completely being controlled, and soon after getting thrashed.
Yeah.
Tale of two fights.
Being the heavyweight Michael Johnson with the same, like, approximate skill set, like, with the skill sliders changed to match heavyweight levels, makes you a pretty bad grappler.
Given Michael Johnson's recent bold return to form, that comparison feels very strong. I had never put that together before. But Walt Harris is Big Johnson.
Even though that's actually a fighter, I believe. Who is that again?
Big Johnson?
I'm sure it's...
Is it Timothy
Force,
Johnson?
Right? Maybe, yeah.
Probably. He has the mustache. He seems like the kind of guy.
Yeah, so, that's basically it. Walt Harris is a powerful, reasonably accurate striker. He is a really bad grappler.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just absolutely shocking. It was, the ugly front kick, and then he, Overeem was just flailing with one hand, and Harris fell over by the cage, and even at that point, I was just like, oh, well, Harris must know. He just has to, put his back against the cage and scramble back to his feet immediately at this point. Immediately. Overeem is clearly, he's basically sleepwalking when he flailed you off him. He's barely conscious. And instead, Harris just got absolutely dominated until Overeem was able to wake up again. I mean, this was it was sad to see Harris lose like that, but it was also, it was encouraging to see Overeem get that badly beaten up and then come back to win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think he's ever done that before.
I think a friend of the show, or I don't know, maybe at this point, he might still be in the category of enemy of the show, Barry Gambler, the Naked Gambler. I think his take on it was something along the lines of the only time that Alistair Overeem didn't get immediately knocked out by the clean punch on the chin was the time that we didn't want it to happen. Or the time that we actually wanted it to happen, or something like that.
Yep.
It was a sort of sad irony that, there was all this emotional weight going into the card for Walt Harris, and then suddenly Overeem unveils a never-before-seen ability to recover from damage and win a fight. Honestly, can you think of another example of a time he's done that?
No, I mean, I literally cannot think of... there's been fights where he's got buzzed slightly and then come back.
Sure. But he's never been... He was, about to be finished on 3.
I've never seen him, go fetal and then come back from having gone fetal.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree. Encouraging, pretty cool. Even Overeem showed something we've never seen from him before. And this is a man who's... I don't know, what is he, about 58 years old or something like that at this point?
I think he's 40.
Yeah, well.
Which is in itself kind of shocking, because he's been fighting for so insanely long.
Right, yeah, 65 MMA fights, 14 kickboxing bouts on his record, who knows how many grappling matches and various other things, and an awful lot of knockouts, an awful lot of knockout losses among those, and he still managed to do something interesting. Do you have any thoughts? Because that is really the fight. There was a turn. The dynamics are just very simple at heavyweight. This is why we don't get excited for this division, folks. It's it's either going to be boring or exciting. And it's only going to be exciting when it is 90% of the time in the dumbest way possible. There's just not a lot of, I don't know. It's not the kind of action movie you go home and keep thinking about. It's no Fury Road, these heavyweight action fights. That's all I'm saying. But do you have any thoughts, Phil, on the Walt Harris tragedy marketing crossover? Because initially I felt it was kind of gross. And then I'm Walt Harris seems to have been sort of the leading force behind this. He wants to publicize the I think this foundation he started, and I don't know about the foundation. I think it's an anti-bail foundation. I don't know how I feel about that either. I just don't know.
Strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mostly to be honest, I've been able to avoid it.
Did you only watch the event after the fact, so you were able to skip through all the...
That is indeed what I did.
There you go.
And
there was a lot of it. They had Walt Harris just full on sobbing about his dead daughter, in the middle of a fucking broadcast of dumb guys with tattoos fighting to nu metal. It was.
Yes, I'm very glad I missed that.
Yeah.
I mean, these last 3 events have been emotionally conflicting enough as it is.
Yes. No, it added some real weight to the main event.
Yeah, frankly, I don't need to see that.
All right. Well, that's the main event. Before we go to another segment, let me see, actually. Do we have time? We sure do. Do you want to talk about this co-main event as well? Claudia Gadelha versus Angela Hill. This was one of 3 fights on this main card that were extremely contentious decisions. And I think everyone just has to sort of pick one. But you and I seem to have agreed that these controversial decisions happened in order of like decreasing plausibility. We're pretty sure Angela Hill deserved the win over Claudia Gadelha here. I have questions about Dan Igue's win over Edson Barboza, and I may shock people. This may shock you to hear, but I'm honestly fine with Song Yadong getting the decision over Chito Vera. I thought the fight was that close. So we have, sort of this progression of like potentially frustrating decisions, but it really culminated with the co-main event where, I don't know. Well, why don't you kick it off? How did Angela Hill look? Any differences in her that you've noticed? And likewise for Claudia Gadelha?
I think that a lot of what we saw in this fight was the product of Gadelha trying to change her style. Because before this, the main dynamic that everyone was discussing is Gadelha going to try and run the sort of patient counterpunching approach that she used against Marcos, despite the fact that that's a stupid approach in this fight?
She should just obviously take Angela Hill down.
Yeah, she should absolutely revert to type and just bum rush her. And that was indeed exactly what Gadelha tried to do. She tried to contain Angela Hill's pace and have a relatively slow-paced kickboxing match where she clearly probably thought that she'd be able to pick up round-winning takedowns if she needed them, and she couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was sort of one of the main dynamics, is that she fought a not great fight, but I thought Angela Hill fought a great fight.
Mm-hmm.
Takedown defense looked much better. She didn't get caught up in clinch exchanges for too long. She's got a tendency. She had a tendency to rely on the same entry a bit too much, where she'd kind of dart in on an angle and lean down to her left, and then try and come with the right hand, or maybe an up jab or something like that. And it did start to get her timed. But in general, I thought she has been someone who I think we've noticed a bit, but it's taken a while to get there. She's been sitting down on her punches more, and, that was what, that's, again, it's got to be one of the first times I think I've seen Angela Hill drop someone.
Right.
And especially someone with a historically pretty great chin. She caught Gadelha hideously out of position and dropped her.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that Hill's stamina has often waned, is that she can't really keep her own pace. But she did that in this fight, and kept up a hard pace for 3 rounds against one of the best opponents she's ever fought. Yeah,
one of the most physical fighters in the division. Certainly one of the best wrestlers. And we didn't really get a chance to see how good Claudia Gadelha is on the ground. You pretty much hit all the marks. I thought this was a brilliant performance from Angela Hill. I didn't expect her to win simply because in a lot of little ways, she's just never won at this level. And, you sort of hit on a lot of the small reasons that she hasn't sort of progressed as much as I have long wanted her to. As for the entries, I thought they were a lot better in this fight than they have been in the past. You know, like she still had that tendency to fall into patterns, and I've never been particularly fond of her entries. Like, she's got such long arms and such a nice jab. I'm consistently frustrated by how often she just enters with like a big hook, just sort of like lunging her head off to one side and swinging in this big punch that curiously doesn't seem to have any power on it because it's such a dramatic over transfer of weight behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like long and tall fighters go, you can compare her, like, she's the opposite end of the spectrum to someone like Anthony Smith, who is
sure, she's been a little more
so
like
reliant. He's so reliant on sitting down on a hard jab and 1-2 that he's basically like a defense gun in placement. And if he's, you know, is tremendously defensively vulnerable otherwise, whereas she's so intent on like stepping in with something weird and unpredictable that she's like constantly robbing herself of the ability to just establish distance while sitting on her own shots. Right.
She certainly did a better job with that. She had a much better sort of cycling between entries. She did get a lot of jabs in, a lot of really nice jabs. She counterpunched pretty well. And I also note the sort of, it's interesting that both the stamina problems have gone away and she is sitting down in her punches more, because I think like this is sort of a style she was sort of unconsciously avoiding falling into for a while, where she would always do the crazy Dominic Cruz impression that seemingly every young Alliance fighter does for the first round. She would come out, she'd do all this movement, all these bizarre entries, just very, very Dominic Cruz. You know, her own take on it, but very much that philosophy of fighting. And then she couldn't maintain that pace. It was just too much dynamic movement. She didn't have Dominic Cruz's incredible stamina. And then she would end up resorting to planting her feet and trading more. So her fights would always just end up being like pretty close brawls. And in this case, it's like she didn't come out with all the crazy movement and the crazy entries. She was way more settled down and way more willing to throw those power shots with her feet planted from the beginning. And it both seemed to prevent her from tiring out and just made her a lot more effective in the pocket. There were a lot of successes with counter punches. I thought she looked great. And I guess the last thing to hit is another thing you mentioned, because you pretty much covered all the bases, is the takedown defense, which, like Drew Dober's last weekend, was better than we've ever seen it. And I feel a great sense of relief, because it seems like Jose Aldo's wisdom is finally like percolating down into the non all-time great freak athlete segments of the MMA world, because both Dober and Angela Hill seem to have finally realized that basically like the Aldo philosophy is correct, that if you're smaller, you'd rather be defending a single leg than a double. And so the first thing you should do is turn every takedown attempt into a single leg. And both Dober and Hill had significant success, like just forcing feeding the single, as I've heard it called, and then limp legging their way free. And just very quickly and efficiently dealing with it. But the other thing for Hill was, I didn't expect it to show up to this degree. I didn't think that her takedown defense would be enough to bolster it. But with that improved takedown defense, her clinch ended up having very much the same impact that Ioane and Jacek did in her fights with Gedalia, where she was able to punish Gedalia in the clinch. And as you said, she didn't hang around in bad positions long. She would let Gedalia put her against the fence now and then she would quickly either get to like head control, she'd get a frame, she'd get both, she'd get collar ties, and would quickly find a way to either snap Gedalia's posture down and turn her, or drive into her and turn her and reverse the position and start landing. So I thought it was just like a really smart, clean performance from Angela Hill. And I don't see how you think Claudia Gedalia won that third round. She got outlanded by 10 strikes, according to Fight Metric. And I don't think her strikes were landing all that cleanly or that powerfully. So
No, I tend to agree. I thought Hill was landing, she was just landing more cleanly, and like if there's a big difference in the, if there's a big difference in the power, then why was one girl the only one to drop the other one?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I thought that also Hill's clinch game has been improved because it's now more of an MMA clinch, and this was kind of similar to Jędrzejczyk. The thing she was better at doing, and this is something we talked about with what's his face, Neil Magny as well. If you are a tall fighter, like head position can be great against a short grappler, because if you can get your head or your under the person's chin, or if you can get your shoulders underneath there, you can just stretch them out.
You have so much leverage.
So whenever Iguodala locked her up in the clinch by the cage, she just, a lot of the time, she would just ram her forehead into Iguodala's jaw and just push on her until she broke posture enough to escape.
It's something that Tyson Fury also does remarkably well as a boxer in the clinch, but he's also really, really good at getting that small angle and cramming his forehead into his opponent's like cheek or neck. And it's really, really effective for a guy that tall to be able to bend his knees and drive a shorter opponent up onto their tippy toes. It works even better in MMA, but that's a very good point. Okay, well, let's take a break, because when we come back, we have two more controversial decisions. We have the return of Krzysztof Jotko, or is it Yatko? I'm going to keep you on your toes. And holy shit, we have Kevin Holland, too. All of that, possibly more, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about this UFC on ESPN 8 undercard now. As I sort of teased you about before we ended the segment one, two more controversial decisions. Maybe it's going to be anticlimactic the way we've arranged this, because I already gave away that these are like less controversial, but that doesn't matter, because we're not here to talk about the decisions. We're here to talk about the fights. And I would say all three of these, Iguodala Hill, Ige Barboza, and Song Vera, fall into the sort of range of, understandably, controversial decisions, which is really a roundabout way of saying that all three of them were really good competitive fights. Something I just feel like we've seen a lot of this week are just like undercard bouts where, people just show up and the fights are not easy to decide. They are frequently decided by only a couple of exchanges here or there, or those kind of fights where you have only one clear round or two clear rounds and then one that you simply cannot pick apart that easily. What I'm saying is all three of these were fantastic. I really enjoyed watching them. And the first thing I want to say about Ige Barboza is that, Phil, last week you sort of presupposed that Edson Barboza was the kind of fighter who would look like more of a power puncher at 145. And almost immediately that seemed to be true. So congratulations on knowing what you're talking about.
Hooray!
That's it. That's the one for the year, right? You don't have to get anything else right.
I'm putting that down. Let's make sure we called it out in the handies. And that one moment when Phil was right.
The time Phil was right award.
So I was thinking about this. We talked about it a bit before the show. Why did I think like this? And the only thing I can say is that Barboza is someone who clubs people when he hits them.
Is it the roteness? Is it the roteness that I've always talked about? Perhaps.
I think so. It's just something to do with the way his punches land. There is there's a kinetic impact rather than a sort of snapping. you know, it's the old shotgun versus the sniper rifle, but because he never really hurts people with his hands. But I mean, you can see him. But this is the thing: when you've seen Edson Barboza punch people before, we have often seen him hurt people with his hands, but he never knocks them down, and he never, he obviously never finishes them. We've seen, and I think it is, he's just someone where he hits them, and they're hurt, and they don't want to be hit by it again, but they are never staggered. And it might be the roteness too, because people don't seem to ever be caught off guard by his punches. But if I think of punches like that, I mean, I think of a higher quality, I think, I think Jeremy Stevens is the most powerful type of puncher like that.
Yes.
Who has clearly benefited from being a larger man, even though we've discussed that, you know, the dynamic behind punches is that you typically actually want to sort of be up a class, because his power is not due to accuracy, it's literally just due to like sheer blunt physical trauma. I think another example would be oh god, I can't believe I've forgotten your favorite bantamweight.
Chito Vera?
Your former Asensau.
My former favorite. Yeah. Don't make me feel like some kind of whore, Phil. All right, I still love them both.
Yeah, he wasn't racist enough for you. And I think another example is actually Jose Aldo. Like he's someone who typically hits people with there's a kinetic impact to it, but it rarely actually it rarely hurt people. Sorry,
I'm still tickled by Chito Vera's racism, which I love and fully support.
Of course you do.
But I don't want to miss what you just said. It was a comparison I made earlier as well. Jose Aldo and Edson Barboza turned into very similar fighters in their respective attempts to drop 10 pounds. Both of them went from being these marvelously quick, agile fighters. Obviously, Aldo's agility was more refined and operated at a higher level than Barboza's, the galloper himself. But they were still both similarly quick, agile fighters, both very explosive kickers. All of these elements that they sort of have in common, and both of them drop a weight class and become markedly slower, or they at least look slower. It seems very clear that they feel much slower compared to their opponents. They both basically turned into sluggers. And for all that we could argue with the decision here, I think that Jose Aldo made a better case for beating Marlon Moraes than Edson Barboza did here, because he he was fighting a better fighter than Dan Ige in Marlon Moraes, and he at least leaned into, in a way that I found very distressing and disappointing, because I have seen Jose Aldo at his best, but Aldo leaned into the new advantages afforded him in this division, or perhaps another way to say it is, he just recognized how this new division was going to limit him. And so in that fight with Marlon Moraes, he was walking him down the entire time. He was inviting exchanges, just looking like the bigger, tougher, harder hitting fighter. And
I think in terms of the decision, there's obviously, Barboza deserved to win this fight way more than Aldo deserved to beat Moraes. But yeah, I think in terms of an appropriate approach for a weight class, Aldo's sort of aggressive pressuring made a lot more sense. Because he tried to be the bully.
You got the impression here that all of Barboza's old issues with galloping backwards on the end of his opponent's punches and just not being able to get away and not being able to fire back, those were all still there. Whenever Ige would push forward, just sort of spamming jabs, and trying to line up a right hand behind it, but just a flurry of pressuring, of punches with pressure. Barboza looked as bad in that regard as he ever has. But there were enough of these little moments of him just being able to stand his ground and just answer with one big cracking punch in an exchange. There was the one where he just sort of marched forward. He landed a big outside low kick, and Ige all night was trying to counter those kicks. Good idea. And Barboza had just already decided that after this low kick lands, I'm going to haul off and hit this dude with a big left hook. Very slow looking for Barboza, very like glacial and deliberate, but effective. It staggered Dan Ige, and the low kick landed clean enough in its own right before that. You could feel that if he had had a little more confidence or a little more flexibility, if he'd had the ability to push forward and just be the big dumb brute who hits harder in this matchup, I think he would have won a lot more clearly. Please.
And we've meant, everyone knows that kicks work better when you are pushing the other guy backwards.
That absolutely.
And so, if he's constantly going to be like trying to retain kicking distance, he's not going to be able to land as many kicks. But Barboza, his chin held up, his cardio pretty much held up.
Mm-hmm.
His punching power looked better.
He looked
he's
really
still
strong
a very
in the clinch. He looked very
defense.
physical.
Yep, and he's still a good, fast combination puncher who hits multiple, works a jab and works the body. Like, there's no reason why he can't force fighters like Dan Ige backwards. And if he can do that, that's when he can really, start chewing up the lead leg. Because a lot of the time he was trying, he had to use kicks as counters on Ige's forward movement, which was really quite risky. But yeah, I mean, I did think that he probably deserved to win this fight. He hurt Ige towards the end of the second round in a fight that in a round that Ige was winning up until that point. I don't think there's any real argument, but Ige was clearly very badly hurt by that liver shot. But I mean, it's one of those ones where you look at it and you wonder whether he's going to learn the right lessons from it. Is it going to be, I got robbed, or is it going to be, okay, this is different. This is a different kind of approach. This is a different kind of fight I have to have down here. And actually, I might actually fit pretty well down here because, again, everything you might have thought might be an issue with the weight, apart from the speed, which was always going to happen, seemed like it worked okay. I mean, as I said, he's a better puncher, and the fact that he's lost a speed edge doesn't matter so much than it would with someone like Michael Johnson, because he's a much more diverse fighter. He doesn't need to hit the same spot at rhythms that people don't expect. Michael Johnson is, or was, mostly a headhunter.
He's not going to disintegrate the moment he touches the ground,
Yeah. I mean, he can afford to carve people up to the leg and body. So I thought this was a strangely encouraging performance from Edson Barboza. Also a great performance from Dan Ige.
I agree. Yeah, I don't want to spend the entire time just complaining about the decisions for any of these fights, because all of them, fighters really showed us something impressive. Granted, we already said Iguodala of this trio did not look all that impressive or well prepared for her matchup, which is partly why I think it was the most disappointing that Angela Hill didn't get the win. But for these two, Ige Barboza and Song Vera were both very competitive fights where both people really showed up and in some ways showed things we hadn't seen from them before. So I thought Ige looked better as a pressure fighter than we've seen him in the past. I was kind of skeptical about that because he showed it in the beginning of his fight with Mirsad Bektic. He was cutting the cage. He was entering range behind these jabs. He was moving his head a little as he came in. And then that only really happened for the first round. And here, he basically did it for 3 rounds, despite getting hurt in both of the first 2. I thought he stayed very consistent and aggressive, but not reckless. And likewise, I agree with Barboza. I honestly, looking at this, I'm never excited about fighters moving down, but I think he might be an okay featherweight if he can make the right adjustments. And we talk so much about how weight classes just sort of change the context for a fighter's style as it is. But this is one sort of rare opportunity where we really get to talk about how just a slight tweak in style would make this fighter as good at this weight class as they were in their previous one. And I think Barboza can do it. There were some moments where he was kind of feeling it. He was like, "Oh, I'm big. Like, I'm kind of a bully now." And I'd like to see him lean into that a lot more. Let's go ahead and talk about our other one before we potentially spend any time on something like Jotko versus Anders. What a fight that was. Song Yadong versus Marlon Vera, my boy Cheeto. Up at featherweight. Love to see that. Both guys just basically not cutting weight. And this one, I think, maybe it was because it was the first one. This was the one where people seemed the most upset about the decision. And I was kind of surprised, honestly. Like, a lot of people came to me on Twitter. They're like, "Oh, this guy loves Cheeto. He's going to be pissed." You apparently showed up to this podcast recording session today with that in mind.
Yes, God damn it.
Hoping that you could rub it in my face that Cheeto had lost a fight that many believe he deserved to win. Man, I thought this fight was so close. Like, the moment the decision went the other way, I was not upset at all. You know, like, I was rooting for Cheeto, of course. But the moment it went to Song Yadong, I was like, yeah, of course. Because even as I was, like, turning in my verdict on Twitter, I was like, I think Cheeto did just enough to really cinch that third round. But even that round was close. And then I was like, I don't know. Yadong might have won both of the first two rounds. And it turned out he did. I think one of the judges... Actually, I think all three judges, they gave him the first two rounds and they gave Cheeto Vera the third. And I think that's okay. Like, maybe you can be a little skeptical because there's a certain percentage chance of all three judges turning in that scorecard, and that second round was close enough, or that first round was close enough that one of the judges should have given one of those rounds. But, like, it was just that kind of fight. Like, I think you could have scored all three rounds for Cheeto Vera, or almost even all three rounds for Song Yadong, and there would be actually a case to defend those cards. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was one, fairly clear round, and in some ways, this is what lends itself to a lot of, like, robbery narratives. Is if you have one clear round and it's the last one, because people are just like, well, that guy was taken over. It was his time, and
it does sort of seem right. It seemed true, or correct, right? It's like the only guy who won any round clearly won the third. It does. I get it. It feels like he won.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is that in terms of the dynamics of the fight, Cheeto overcame he overcame his problems and achieved his win conditions better than Song Yadong did.
Right.
So because the whole narrative of the fight was Cheeto is going to start slow and get dropped, and he's going to have to struggle his way back into the fight over the next two rounds. Yeah. And you could argue he won that first round. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he did. I mean, it was super close. I would be happy scoring probably either of the first two rounds. I thought
Song Yadong got it live, but close, very close.
Yeah, and he did win the third round. It was. So yeah, you could say Cheeto's again. He's putting on the performance of a lifetime. Angela Hill versus Iguodala. He's in the fight where you really expect him to get clobbered in the first round. He's not doing it. And he's still putting on the pressure in the third. So yeah, there's both a individual narrative and a sort of typical fight narrative at play here. But yeah, objectively, there's one reasonably clear round and there's two super close ones. Yeah. And it was. I mean, and it was a fantastic fight.
It was amazingly good.
I don't know if we mentioned this on the show or if I did it in my breakdown, but. This was clearly, I think, having this fight at featherweight was clearly an advantage for Song Yadong, I thought.
Aha. I didn't even think of that he didn't slow down as much as I expected. Maybe the weight class change had a bigger difference on him. That's
okay. So it definitely wasn't on the show then. Yeah, this is the thing. Like you always have to remember whether you said stuff in the in like the vivisection or heavy hands the previous week. I have to remember
Yes.
whether it was in like staff picks or the toe to toe.
Well, I want to be clear. It's quite possible you said it to me, and I'm just very dumb. So I may have simply forgotten. But yes, that's a very good point. That likely favored Song Yadong.
Also, it may also have meant that Cheeto was way less likely to get dropped because he did eat a ton of power punches.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say is like, yeah, there is this narrative like it's Cheeto's fight. Especially if you go in rooting for him, as I did, I think a lot of people did. A lot of people. I don't think I'm the only person who finds him to be very endearing and easy to root for. It's because of the racism. But yeah, there was the narrative that it was Cheeto's fight. He was starting to take over. If anybody won, it feels like him. And all I have to say to counter that is that in every single one of those rounds, Cheeto Vera was getting absolutely blasted in the face with right hands. Like clean power punches landing when he was undefended, landing around the guard, landing through the guard. He really, really needed, like if Cheeto Vera, as I said online, if he didn't have his chin, he would have very likely gotten knocked down or possibly knocked out in this fight if he didn't have the chin that he does have. And perhaps that means that at 135, he would have gotten knocked out or would have gotten knocked down and would have had a much bigger deficit to climb back from. What I hadn't considered is that down at 135, maybe that also means that Song Yadong himself gets finished or overwhelmed more dramatically in round 3. But as it stood at featherweight, it was like a slightly muted version, I guess, of that dynamic, but in a way that yielded 3 rounds of really excellent action. It was fantastic. Anything stand out to you? Any adjustments or developments from the two fighters that we haven't seen from them before?
I thought Cheeto looked better defensively.
Mm-hmm.
I thought in terms of like picking off shots with the high guard, like he's still not got much defensive craft other than that.
He's getting there in a sort of gatey way.
All the problems that we saw from one guy tended to be countered by improvements from the other.
Mm-hmm.
So Cheeto looked better defensively, but Yadong showed up as a way better combination puncher.
Yeah.
I think Cheeto's improved defense made him a more effective pressure fighter, which meant that he could pick up, what I think a lot of people saw, which was big sort of dominant flurries of offense by the cage, where he would just, punch his way into the clinch and then grab his weird tie lock up.
Mm-hmm. He was really effective in the clinches
good.
In general, not even just with those tie clinchy positions. Ryan Wagner's head just exploded. But like also just using underhooks and very quickly turning and reversing his opponent. I think he really shocked Yadong with the clinch game. Like I think Song Yadong is sort of used to being able to do a bit of everything, and very weirdly, Uriah Faber was in his corner. Is this his first fight at Alpha Male, or has he been there for the last couple?
I don't think so. He's been there for a while.
Yeah, Uriah Faber was like really determined to see him get a takedown. It does make me wonder, like, how adaptable is this man's brain, for what it's worth, to like other styles of fighting, and how good is Team Alpha Male really going to be for Song Yadong? I don't know. I have to wonder, but they did seem like they thought they were going to turn things around by getting a takedown, and I don't know, like, it's Cheeto Vera.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
Cheeto was mauling him for the brief moments that they spent on the ground.
Yeah, he's like an incredibly good scrambler. He's super aggressive. He's got these really long limbs. He chains together both submissions and strikes really seamlessly. Like, I don't know. Even if I don't think Song Yadong was ever able to get Cheeto Vera down, but if he were, would it have been a good strategy for winning the fight? I'm not sure about that. So I don't know. There are a lot of things pointing to like, oh, Cheeto Vera like deserved to win, feels like the winner, but in practice, I just thought there were a lot of exchanges in which Song Yadong was landing a lot of right hands. So
yeah, and he's still he is a remarkable talent.
Oh, 100%, man.
I mean, he's now been fighting for a while, but he's still, he's been fighting for a while because he was doing it when he was a teenager. I mean, he's 22.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous to show that level of quality in a fight like that at this stage is genuinely remarkable.
And perhaps more impressive that he has avoided the young veteran track of like becoming this like defensively minded. We've seen this from other fighters in the past, like Jorge Masvidal recently pulled himself out of it. Was like, oh yeah, what if I just hit people really hard from now on? Robbie Lawler had a turn like that of his own after he sort of had like a mid-career malaise. I don't know, maybe something like that is coming for Song Yadong, but for the time being, for a guy who was like a 14-year-old fighting grown men earlier in his career, he looks like a really confident, aggressive, and damaging fighter. So, who knows?
I also like the way, like, after the as they were going to get the results, Cheeto like came up to Song Yadong and was, like
fuck
bumping
that shit,
fists
man.
with him, and no, he was like bumping fists with him and like hugged him, and
before the decision.
Before the decision, yeah.
He's like, we're not friends anymore.
Yeah,
this is your fault. Yeah, he's an emotional guy, Cheeto Vera. It's part of what makes him so charming. I don't think he knows. I mean, do you think he knows the implications that China man has in American English?
I would just call your opponents by their names.
Well,
I think
Cheeto Vera is the kind of guy.
Thing to do.
No, okay, listen to me, Phil. All right.
Oh God.
Cheeto Vera has fought several other men from China. I don't blame him. He's like a cowboy Cerrone. He doesn't know who the fuck he's fighting. He doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he remembers these people's names. And the other thing is Song Yadong is a man from China. So I don't know if that's what he meant, or if it's, I don't know. I don't know what the connotations are in Ecuador. Okay, that's all I'll say.
I think it's just innocent. A safe thing to do.
He's innocent.
To just call your opponents by their names.
He's innocent, and in fact, he's justified, and he did the right thing. He said the right things. Go Cheeto. All right, we'll be back after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Hello and welcome back to Heavy Hands. Just a couple more things to cover here on the Harris versus Overeem card, but Eric Anders and Krzysztof Jotko are yet before us. And I think my most underappreciated tweet of the weekend was when someone said, God, this is such a middleweight fight. And I said, the earth is healing. Nature is returning. Because I do feel like nothing has been more reassuring to me throughout this entire sort of confusing and emotionally tumultuous process, these three events. Nothing has been more reassuring than this, the most middleweight fight I think I've ever seen. It was just really like a pinnacle of what this division is in a way that I haven't seen in ages, to be honest. This was very much a non-ranked middleweight fight. What do you think?
Also, in a series of events where tons of people have come in with, surprising like little technical wrinkles to their games and strategic approaches. Yes. Then we have Eric Anders, like a big plodding rock of consistency.
Yes. He's so reliable.
An absolutely atrocious approach. and no visible skill improvements.
Yep, but he had a different haircut, so a worse one.
Yeah, this was weird, because I remember, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it, is that I'm staying with my parents during lockdown, and my when I was catching up on this show, my dad was sort of came into the room and was seeing what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
and so I would explain the dynamics. He really enjoyed Yadong Vera.
Oh yeah,
And then he left after this one.
I wonder why.
But at the beginning of it, I said, Anders, I've picked Yotko because he's better, but a lot of other people have picked Anders because he's just more durable, and they're probably right. He's like way bigger and stronger, you can tell that, but he's not a good wrestler. He's never going to out wrestle this other guy. So I don't know. And then they just decided that was going to be how they were going to win the fight.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, I don't know if they've ever seen Christoph Yoko fight before.
It did seem like
this man does not get out wrestled.
He is. That is one thing, in fact, that he is shockingly good at. Is wrestling and scrambling. It has in a sort of middleweight Dominic Cruz fashion been the ace up his sleeve in many of his UFC fights.
Yeah, I think only David Branch is the only person I think that we've seen. But yeah, otherwise it's remarkably good. And yeah, so this was such a bad strategic performance, because you could even see how Anders could have changed it and it would have it could have worked. I think the commentators even called it out, is that he could have just if he just forced those takedown exchanges, and then if he just forced those takedowns, pushing Yotko back into the fence,
and then break and throw lots of punches.
Yeah, and he just could have done that.
Because like on 3 separate occasions, Yotko was like panicked, backed right up against the fence, and was desperately shelling up, trying not to get hit. He was really feeling the pressure, and Anders clearly hit a lot harder than him. And it only ever happened apparently by accident, because it certainly wasn't something that Anders insisted on doing. It wasn't something he made happen throughout the fight. And otherwise, yeah, he just did a lot of wrestling. And I just don't get this. Eric Anders, he did this when he fought Thiago Santos as well. Remember when he had that light heavyweight fight and he was really wrestling heavy. Weirdly, I don't think he did the Khalil Roundtree.
Why would you want to do that?
It seems
find that Khalil Roundtree isn't a good wrestler?
It seems inexplicable when he chooses to try this. But going back to that Santos fight, it was I don't want to strike with Thiago Santos. It's okay, I get that. But Thiago Santos is a pretty good defensive wrestler. If you're on the Elias Theodoro tier of takedown ability, you're not going to get him down. Certainly not easily. And Eric Anders is not on that tier. He is more physical than Elias Theodoro. There's no doubt about that. He's a very strong man. But he is not a technically proficient wrestler. He muscles absolutely everything, to the point that even when he does succeed, most of his opponents are just able to out-scramble him after that, because he's so, pit bull, doggedly locked onto one move, or has already thrown his weight in one direction so determinedly that he can't adjust to the scramble. And yeah, this fight, once again, I guess I get it. Jotko's not as physically imposing as Khalil Roundtree, but he actually does wrestle well. And that's all Anders seemed like he expected or wanted to do in the entire fight, was to grab onto him and try to take him down. And I guess I appreciated the opportunity to see that, given a slow, by design, not by nature, but Anders' footwork, his technique, again, is the thing that really makes him slow. He's just plodding. Against a slow and technically underdeveloped fighter, Krzysztof Jotko can still look very exciting and get lots of sharp shots in, and even make defensive adjustments down the stretch. None of them was nice, was particularly nice to look at or technically sound. But Anders was so predictable with his offense that by the third round, Jotko wasn't worried about that left hand anymore. He was able to slip it consistently and land his counters. and then could just basically afford to ride out every takedown attempt. Really strange performance from Eric Anders. Really not an exciting fight, but I did still love it because it was a style of fight that I feel like I don't get to see that much anymore. You know, I miss like
and it was just also like it was just a nice example of like play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Yes. Yeah, it was like a morality tale in the middle of this otherwise like very modern, like conflicted, gritty, gray morality style of card. Like who deserved the decision? Does it even matter? What does it all mean? And then right in the middle, it's like, if you fight dumb, you will lose dumb. That's it. It was a rock, as you said, to hold on to in the storm. So I appreciated it for what it was. The last thing we have to talk about, Kevin Holland. This is going to be very quick and very loud. Ah! No, I don't know. I was going to start ululating. Kevin Holland decided to be good, which in such a way that it sort of suggests he's been able to do that the whole time. And I think that's correct. I think he could have decided to be good in a lot of his previous fights and just never has. But he basically just came out and beat 10 shades of shit out of Anthony Hernandez. And, yep. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was nice to see him coming back to, as we said, like, Kevin Holland always has, like, moments of looking good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was nice to see shades of the, like, accurate striker who can work the body, who mysteriously finished Jeff Neal back in the day.
Yep.
You're like, oh yeah, there he is. Remember that guy. And I would like to assume that that's some kind of... He said it was a strategic choice because, you know, he thought that Hernandez starts fast and he needed to match his pace, and he thought it was going to be weak to the body. But, you know, it might have been that, or it might have just been that he shook the magic 8-ball backstage before the fight went on and looked at it and it said, fight good.
Yeah, I mean, his other explanation was that Daniel Cormier wouldn't be there to give him wrestling advice.
Oh, yeah.
So he'd better not, you know, quote unquote, get taken down this time, which for Kevin Holland means doggedly pursue takedowns and then blame the other guy. So who knows? Like, who knows what's going on with Kevin Holland? I will say, as there always are, there were a lot of little momentary things that were genuinely quite good. You know, like, and even in Kevin Holland's worst performances, we'll see little moments of defense or scrambling where you're like, man, this guy knows what he's doing. There's just no structure. In this case, it almost possibly accidentally yielded what felt like a structured fight. But like, I mean, I really liked that clinch work, for example. I liked the pressure. I liked the feints. It was very short. But, yeah, Kevin Holland did what Leon Edwards has been doing in the clinch. They clashed. He immediately got to an angle, landed the elbow, followed with a knee. There was a nice aggressive sort of flow to his attack there. And that was it. So, Kevin Holland. The main thing is I'm kind of mad at him. Because, like, I was really enjoying at least pretending that I didn't care whether he won or lost. You know, it allowed me to sort of mute my disappointment. I think somewhere inside, I still did want him to win, you know. I was rooting for him. But it was easy to let it go. Because he just, like, all of these good pieces did not a good fighter make. And now he might be a good fighter. So now it's like Chito Vera, where, like, I have to get mad when it doesn't work out for him. I don't know. Kind of sucks.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? He might just try cutting to welterweight and then get immediately subbed out by Mickey Gall in a couple of weeks. Who knows?
Great call out, though. Loved the way he made it. You know what? I think if Kevin Holland were to become more racist, I would probably forgive him for forcing me to care now. You know, if he were to just become slightly more racist, he'd fit right into my pantheon.
Yep. Wait a minute. Are there any Chinese middleweights for him to fight? I cannot think of any off the top of my head. Or just like...
I suspect this is going to become a running joke that is far less funny to our audience than it is to me. I don't give a shit.
Yes. Very true, Connor.
I don't give a shit. It's my show. It's my show. It's my racist roster of weird fighters. Okay. Well, that's Kevin Holland. It wasn't really the Kevin Holland I wanted. Certainly wasn't the Kevin Holland I expected, but it was Kevin Holland. There's no denying that. All right. Well, that is about all we have time for. And to like the one or two people, by the way, on the YouTube comments who keep complaining every time I mention that we've run out of time for something or that we've gone overtime or whatever, they're like, you can't run out of time. It's a podcast. I just want you to know I'm doing it specifically to make you mad. That is why now is when the show has to end this week. Deal with it. Before we come back next week to discuss, I don't know, actually. I guess
Woodley.
Well, no, that's in 2 weeks.
No, that's 2 weeks away. Yeah,
we're gonna have an
so
off.
Looks like we're gonna be doing some of our questions.
Yeah, we may have some questions. We have a lot of topic ideas that we have saved up from the full-on quarantine period, to which we may be returning. I don't know. We may find out in 2 weeks' time that every fighter on this card caught the Rona from each other or from Joe Rogan. That would probably be the most UFC thing that could happen. So we'll see. But we'll be back with some kind of topic next week. Maybe a guest, maybe one of those boys from the fight site, maybe some other analysts that we know from the world of online. Anyway, until then, Phil, do you have anything coming out this week?
I'm actually going to try and put something together, and I give no promises because I am terrible at finishing things. I'm just going to try and put something together. We talked about this a little bit with Danny Martin about the sort of intimate horror and tragedy of watching the UFC over the last 3 events. You know, looking at these specifically these 3 main events that have seemed to sync up so well with this sort of quiet, crowdless version of the UFC. We've gotten these, well, honestly, quite dark 3 main events in their own way. So I was going to write something about that.
Cool. That sounds fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to it in, I don't know, a couple years' time, most likely.
Hell yes.
And I'm allowed to make that joke because Lord knows if anything will be coming out from me this week. I was kind of thinking, looking at like Barboza, that I might expand that Justin Gaethje idea and just talk about left hooks. A left hook is a great punch. It's a great counter. It's a great almost defensive maneuver at the end of a combination. It tracks a certain path that other punches just can't reach, so it can sort of negate a lot of defensive footwork. And we have seen several examples of fighters with great left hooks. We saw some good ones from Angela Hill. We saw some good ones from Edson Barboza. Of course, we saw great ones from Justin Gaethje. So maybe
I think we saw some good ones from Claudia Gadelha. I think it's our only like really good bunch.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. We definitely did. So I might just write an article about some of the left hooks we've seen and try to keep it fairly short and concise. But, like I said, I'm allowed to make fun of Phil because I also give no promises as to when these things might actually materialize. Otherwise, that is the end of our episode for this week. You should find us on social media if you would like to complain about how short it was. You can do that to Phil at Evil Greg Jackson on Twitter. And you can find me at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. Make sure you head over to the Patreon. If you didn't hear it already, we did a hour and 15-minute long breakdown of the Smith versus Teixeira card with Danny Martin from the Fight Site, which I thought was fantastic. It was really interesting, good discussion. It's always nice to just sort of have a third man in the booth. And that's it. We'll talk to you guys next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
I like how you are just falling into the cliche of becoming a cantankerous sports pundit.
Oh, how's that?
I'm gonna like my guys, even if they're racist. Yeah. Political correctness is ruining this sport.
That's right.
People say it's going on too long, and I say, fuck them! Go on as long as I want it.
Well...
If I say it's gone over, it's gone over.
Well... fuck the fans, Phil. That's, I think, the best philosophy for any creative. Fuck the fans. They don't know what's good for them.
Yep.
That's
well
why
on your way to becoming the Morrissey of fight analysis.
That is right. Morrissey.
Ugh.
I'm sorry. I'll workshop that.